Finger guns primed, ready to go. We are live, ladies and gentlemen. There have been a slew of articles recently suggesting the US dollar is quickly losing its status as world reserve currency. How likely is this, and how will it affect you? Also, is it just a coincidence that this development is occurring at the same time as plans to issue a digital dollar start ramping up? How quickly are we approaching a world where you don't even own the money that you use on a daily basis? We're going to be talking about all this and more in episode 395 of the In the Tank podcast. Boom! Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. We got a full crew today. Joining me, I've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing pretty well. I lost a bet to Chris Talgo, also on this podcast. I can't even remember, Chris, what the bet was over, but I do owe you lunch. So after this podcast is over, we are going out to lunch. Donnie, see, this is what you don't get free lunch from Jim because, you do this from home. So too bad.
I thought there's no such thing as a free lunch, but I'll take it.
Yeah, for you today, there is a free lunch.
Oh, all right. Also joining us, I'm curious about that the bet stakes there, but maybe during the podcast.
Real quick. It was fantasy football. We were in the playoffs, and it was I think first or second round. And fortunately for me, unfortunately for Jim, my team,
Oh, great. So you're finally paying up for like 5 months later. Great.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute, Donnie. We don't know that. Are we talking about American football or European football?
This is the XFL.
Yeah, it's the XFL.
USFL.
The American Football League.
We got Justin Haskins, director of the Socialism Research Center here at the Heartland Institute. How are you today, good sir?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for asking. It's really nice of you.
The S on his hat stands for stupendous. Also, Chris Talgo, editorial director at the Heartland Institute. How are you today, good sir?
Doing good, but I do just want to relay a teeny bit of sad news. Jerry Springer, a person who, when I was, let's say, probably like in 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, whenever I'd stay home from school, we'd watch Jerry Springer, and unfortunately, he died today. So,
I was afraid you were going to end the sentence with that. Oh, yeah. That's a shame. See, I liked him back in his political days before he got
mayor of Cincinnati.
That's right. That's right.
That's right.
It's Donald's favorite mayor of Cincinnati, by the way.
Yeah, Donald, can you tell me what else in terms of Cincinnati politics? I mean, you're such an expert, so.
I will say that at the end of the podcast. Audio only listeners, I want to say that you can join us a day earlier. You're probably listening to us on a Friday. You can join us live on Thursdays at noon Central Time, where you can catch the show streaming live on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Rumble. And you can join the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the feed. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Also, we do have that super chat function if you want to help out the show financially a little bit. You can pretty much guarantee that we will read your question or comment if you use that super chat function. And also you can help out the show in a non-monetary way by hitting the like button, sharing this content, subscribing if you haven't already, or just leaving a comment under this video. All helps break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. So we do have a lot to get to in this episode, and to save Justin's feet, I'm going to try to move through some of this quicker than last time, because I think last episode we went an hour and 20 minutes, so we try to keep it to that hour mark, but we'll see. But one thing that I do want to mention before we get into our main topics at hand is to briefly talk about the news that broke on Monday. Very famous host of a very famous news show ended their run after more than 15 years. People were shocked, wondering where he's going to go next. And obviously, I'm talking about Don Lemon. So, Chris, how are you with the loss of Don Lemon?
I was a little shocked to see Don Lemon was let go by CNN. But you know what? I think that this has been in the making because Don Lemon used to have, I think it was the 8 p.m. primetime show. And then after the ratings, tanked for that, he was put on the morning show with I can't remember the name of the two female co-hosts, who he basically just treated terribly, and he had some other really terrible comments about Nikki Haley being past her prime. So I think that this was inevitable.
Yeah, I'm surprised that you had a thorough answer for that, because clearly I was joking. No one cares about Don.
I could go on and on and on.
What's funny about it is that you call him Don Lemon. The only reason people call him that is because Tucker Carlson started calling him that.
Right.
That followed him everywhere. Exactly.
Don Lemon. All right. Yeah. So obviously, I teased this is, Tucker Carlson on the same day. Was announced that he is no longer with Fox News, effective immediately. In fact, it was announced on Monday, and it was that his previous Friday show was his last show. So it wasn't even that there was some 2-week notice. He was going to have some send-off episode. Just nope, over the weekend, done. It's over. No more Tucker Carlson. So, there's some loser people on the left that were trying to make comparisons of Don Lemon and Tucker Carlson, saying, oh, you don't see people on the left losing their minds over Lemon like you see people losing it about Tucker Carlson. To which my response is, A, I haven't seen anyone really losing their minds over Tucker Carlson. And B, no one ever cared about Don Lemon. Nobody actually watches him. Conversely, Tucker Carlson has by far the most viewed cable news show out there. So the fact that he was just all of a sudden just gone, it was shocking. So yeah, you're going to blame people for being shocked. I was shocked. I don't even watch them. So it's, I think it's worth talking about just for that. So it's more of that. It was just a shock. In Don Lemon's case, it was a shock that he was even still employed by CNN at this point. But yeah, Fox News parting ways without him, without any warning, height of his popularity. Jim, thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts on this. I mean, I haven't had cable in a couple of years. And on this podcast, we do count on Chris Talgo to watch cable news for us to let us know what's going on.
It's at this whole organization, actually, Jim, not just the podcast. Pretty much.
So I only saw Tucker on YouTube or Rumble, and I would see a clip on Twitter or something like that. But often I subscribed to the Fox News YouTube channel to, as the promo would go at the end of each one of them, to watch our nightly opens. Tucker's, it was said by somebody on something else I watched, but they said that Tucker would make news on his news show, that Tucker's opening monologues, unlike kind of the silly talking points memo, stupid stuff that Bill O'Reilly did. He was never my cup of tea, but he was super successful. And when they bumped him out for reasons, they thought, Fox is in big trouble. And then Tucker comes in, takes over the 8 o'clock hour, and is vastly more successful than Bill O'Reilly ever was. But, the only thing worth watching, in my opinion, on Fox News ever since the 2020 election was Tucker Carlson's nightly opens, or maybe once in a while, one of his interviews or something else farther along in the program. But, Tucker Carlson was the flagship of that app they were trying to get going, that Fox Nation. He was the biggest star on that. He was the main focus of getting people to subscribe. So now that's going to go in the toilet. I don't think it's going to go CNN Plus overnight, but it's in big trouble. And in fact, I was just about to share this with Andy. The ratings for the 8 o'clock hour on Monday were decent because people wanted to see what Fox News might say about Tucker being fired on the first day of his show after that. On Tuesday night's ratings, actually, and I'll share it with Andy here in a second, Fox News, for the first time in maybe 20 years, got beat in the 8 o'clock hour by both CNN and MSNBC.
No kidding.
And those show in the demographic they care about, which is young people, 25 to 54. So let that be known, Donnie. I am still young. I'm still in the coveted demographic, because I'm not yet past the age of 54.
By Fox News standards. Let's just put that asterisk there.
Well, by media advertising standards, I'm still young. So I think that's awesome. But yeah, he got beat. Fox got beat. That was unthinkable. And MSNBC and CNN have been trying their best. Even combined, they wouldn't even get the ratings that Tucker Carlson got. And so this is bad for Fox News. They think that Fox News is the brand. They're wrong. Tucker Carlson was the most important person on the top rated network, and he is not replaceable, and he's going to find a landing place of his own after all the legal stuff gets sorted out. Hopefully he'll be able to do something on the air before the 2024 elections. So Fox, I think, is in big trouble. People are already unplugging from cable. People don't really care as much about cable news anymore. This is a watershed moment in media.
Yeah, I mean, we can question what Tucker Carlson's next step is going to be. Is he going to go to the independent route? Is he going to join Newsmax or the Blaze or something like that? I don't know. I don't think anyone here has any insight into that. But Chris, I am curious about what you think this means for Fox News, considering that they are kind of the legacy media version for the right that everything else is, and they took a hit after the 2020 elections and all of that with their core base. This, I think, is just going to be even worse for it, especially if the stats that Jim is saying is accurate. Fox Nation, as Jim mentioned, had Tucker Carlson was kind of leading the way when it came to those documentaries and all of that. I've heard stories, anecdotal, that people are canceling their Fox Nation subscriptions and all of that. So what do you think that this means for Fox in general, Chris?
Gee, I think that Fox has a big decision to make. Do they want to pivot more to the center and try to become a more establishment network, or do they want to ride this populist wave that Tucker really hit upon? And I think I do watch Fox quite a bit, and I think on many issues, whether it was Ukraine, whether it was COVID, or whether it was January 6th stuff, Tucker, he definitely, took his own stance. And I think that, that definitely worried some of the executives. And apparently there was, some animosity between him and some of the executives. So I don't know how much of this is personal. I don't know how much of this is related to the Dominion lawsuit, and there's a Smartmatic $2.7 billion lawsuit, in the offing. So I don't know if this is related to that, but I think that Fox News has a big decision to make. Are they going to, to embrace what Tucker stood for, which is truth, which is, instead of just towing the line, Tucker, he was not afraid to ask the difficult questions, and he was not afraid to, go into some of these really controversial topics and just, full bore, just explore them. And that's why I liked his program. I've never really been a fan of some of the more mainstream Fox News hosts like Sean Hannity, some of the others, because I feel like they're just kind of just saying the standard conservative, line. What I found so interesting about Tucker Carlson is sometimes he would say stuff that I totally disagreed with, but then afterwards I'd think, wow, that's really interesting. He, made me think of this in a new way. So yeah, that's what I'm going to miss.
Yeah, it's funny because Tucker Carlson did kind of break radio silence the other day on Twitter. We have the clip, but it's 2.5 minutes long. I don't want to bog down the podcast, but in it, he was critical of just kind of the nature of the machine when it comes to the establishment media, whether it's the left or just Fox News. And he almost seemed like a little self-critical. And he was talking about these debates that would be had that would only be over a segment that would be really short, and they weren't really substantial, and they'd be forgotten in a couple of years. You would never remember some of the debates that happen on these news channels and all of that. And what he wants is a place for real debates over topics that really matter and all of that.
Well, he had that. He had two things on Fox Nation. He had the Tucker Carlson originals, like Jim was talking about. And those were really great documentaries. They were really well done, really well produced, and on very interesting topics. But he also had what was called Tucker Carlson Today, and it was an hour long form interview show with a whole bunch of people that, whether it be Russell Brand or Kirstie Alley. I mean, it was just the full gambit. That's what I think attracted him to so many people, because he was not like a Sean Hannity, where it's just I stick with, this stance and I only talk to these people. Tucker Carlson was a maverick in some sorts. And it's kind of sad that he's out now, because now I feel that Fox News is probably just going to become more and more establishment-y, Jeb Bushy, and less. I mean, I hate to say it, but I think
please clap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I don't disagree, and I do think that Fox Nation opened up a new avenues for him, because that's what new media does. I've on this podcast, I've praised what Joe Rogan did with podcasting, and have these long form conversations where you could actually get into the meat of topics. And Justin, I'm curious about your take on this before we move on to our main topics at hand, because you've been on Tucker Carlson a number of times, and even with topics that you bring to the table, which are very important, you get 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes to talk about it, and then they move on to some commercial break or another host. So thoughts on any of this that we've talked about so far?
Yeah. So, I think that the biggest question going forward, really from a sort of a conservative movement perspective, is going to be, how does the conservative movement communicate with people? Where do people within the conservative movement moving forward, where do they go to get information? Will this be a turning point in that, or will Tucker Carlson's departure be just another, sort of a Bill O'Reilly moment where, he had a loyal following, he left, but the Fox News train keeps rolling forward? I mean, Fox has been for a very long time the juggernaut in conservative news. We know that. But it has been sort of the meeting place, unofficial meeting place for conservatives nationally in a lot of ways. Because where else over the past, say, 20 to 30 years have conservatives all had one thing in common? I mean, there were really big talk radio stars like Rush Limbaugh, and you have Glenn Beck, and you've got Sean Hannity, and you've got some Dennis Prager and all these people, right? Who are big. But for the most part, you get people who listen to Dennis Prager every day or whatever, or they listen to Rush Limbaugh when he was still alive, and that would be their thing. But not everybody did. But almost everybody watched Fox, at least for a long period of time. Almost every conservative, politically active conservative, watched Fox at least occasionally. And over time, that has started to go away. That started to erode. There's been all these new networks, streaming platforms. Glenn Beck was a huge part of that, with the Blaze, the first ones to really do something like that. And now you have Daily Wire, you have a whole bunch of other places that are like that. And and YouTube has changed things dramatically as well. You get people who have popular YouTube channels and YouTube show podcasts, Joe Rogan, like all these people who are outside of that world now having a big influence on the media in general, but conservative media in particular. You see that. So the question is, what happens now? I mean, do you start to see Fox fall away from being that place where everybody goes? And because a lot of people already have left, but I mean, is it now just a matter of time before it just really is basically like CNN or MSNBC? It'll never be quite as bad as that, because those places are dumpster fires, but it might be, but will it ever be what it was, say 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or even today? Or is this the turning point where the really politically active conservatives in the movement say, I'm done.
Right.
We're gonna find some other way to do this, but we're not going to do it at Fox. And as a person who has had a lot of experience at Fox, it makes me, sad. Fox has been very, very good to me over the years, and Tucker Carlson in particular, very, very good to me. I did the show many, many times, probably close to 20 times or something like that in just a couple of years. And so I was on the show a lot. I've done Fox and I've done all the shows, and Tucker put me on the air when I was still very early on in my TV days. I mean, I probably only had a handful of TV appearances when Tucker put me on the air the first time. And they kept putting me on, despite the fact that I really didn't have a lot of experience, and they just kept rolling with it. And they were very willing to take ideas that I had and run with that for segments and talk about things that other people were not willing to talk about. And then I know we're going on and on and on, but this isn't something I've really talked about at all for the most part. But there was a period of time where I had a pretty serious health problem in my family. And it made it extremely difficult for me to go to TV studios. I could do stuff from home, but going out was very hard to do. And I remember because Tucker's, the way that he does his show, basically everybody or the vast majority of people are expected to go to a studio. So you'd have to go travel to a studio and you have to leave like, an hour and a half or 2 hours before you're on, and you got to wait there. And so it's a long period. It's like a 3-hour thing, 3 or 4 hours just to go on the air for 2.5 minutes or whatever. So I remember talking to his producers about it one night, and I just said, look, I just don't know that I can do that. This is health problem, and I'm really sorry about it. But because really being on that show, being in prime time, I mean, that was like my dream. And his producing, not just one, but multiple of his producers, they were so kind to me, and they were so generous about that. And they went out of their way to say that, Tucker and the whole team, whenever you're ready to come back, we will have you back on right away. And then every couple of weeks, they would check in on me. They would check in on my family, asking if we were okay, making sure everything was good. No pressure if you ever want to come back on the show. I mean, stuff that does not happen in TV news, because TV news is ruthless and they just use and abuse people all the time. And I mean, and so it's really hard for me to see this happen, because I really do believe that he's a good guy, and that the people who worked for him were good people. And so it's awful in that sense. And then on the other hand, I know people who are still at Fox who are amazing people. And so it's really tough.
It's a heartfelt story you got there, Justin. And just keep in mind that when we go long on this episode, it's that it's that story's fault. So.
I'm sure there's something we can cut out. I'm sure there's something else we can cut out.
No, this is live, buddy. Here we go. So keep standing up, Justin. No, but stories like that about Tucker are legion. And if you have not seen his speech that he gave for the Heritage Foundation's 50th anniversary benefit dinner, you should check it out. It's not hard to find on YouTube. It is fantastic. And, there's rumors that, I've done a lot of reading on this, but there's rumors that what he said in that speech, he kind of ripped on media as not being very healthy for democracy and all that stuff. But he talked about religion, and he talked about how there's an evil right now, pushing against good. And that, there's one rumor that kind of freaked out Rupert Murdoch. He didn't like that. And that was part of what got Tucker pushed out. But, Tucker is a good dude.
So one real question, because I know we want to move on, but I am genuinely interested. I'm not just in your opinions, but also in just what the audience thinks too for this show. Do you think that, that Fox News is this the beginning of the end for Fox, it being an influential force within the conservative movement? Are, the really powerful people like when I was talking to Donnie about this just before the show started, I brought up Ben Shapiro, right? Like the Ben Shapiros of the world, the Glenn Becks of the world, these people still go on Fox. They up until very recently, they would go on Tucker, they would go on these other shows, right? Are they still going to do that? Is this still going to be the most important meeting place for conservative minds? Or is this the beginning of the end of that? Because a lot of people will say, look, he was one of our own and we don't think you treated him well. And that's it for us. We're done. I don't know. I'm genuinely interested in knowing what you guys think of that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that this is definitely one of those pivot points, and we'll look back at this period of time as like, oh yeah, that's when they started circling the drain, or oh yeah, that's when they pivoted towards something different, or hey, it was a new rebirth or something, and they went on to do bigger and better things. Who knows? But this will be that pivot point.
Interestingly, they also fired Dan Bongino this weekend. So it seems to me like they're kind of trying to get rid of some of the more outspoken, populist-minded people that that talked about things that were kind of taboo, and that worries me, because those were the two of the the people that I respected most and I enjoyed their shows because they did go outside the box a lot. I still like Mark Levin. He's on Sunday nights. That is a long form show. He gets into some really interesting stuff. But I do agree that it seems to me, because I am an avid Fox viewer, that they're kind of shifting more towards like entertainment, info, entertainment, culture, pop culture, all that stuff. And they are less about like substantive issues. And that's why that's why Tucker's video resonated so much with me, because what he's saying is, why are we not talking about big stuff, whether it's Ukraine or, Joe Biden or Hunter Biden, but we're sitting here obsessing over these tiny little insignificant things. And I think,
speaking of insignificant things and outspoken people, we do have one clip that I want to tee up for Jim's comments here. This is AOC talking about good old Tucker Carlson. Go ahead and play this clip.
In terms of what's allowed on air and what isn't. And when you look at what Tucker Carlson and some of these other folks on Fox do, it is very, very clearly incitement of violence. Very clearly incitement of violence. And that is the line that I think we have to be willing to contend with.
Tucker Carlson is out at Fox News. Couldn't have happened to a better guy. Deplatforming works, and it is important. And there you go. Good things can happen.
Yeah, I'm sorry I had to put you all through that. I listening to her is just nails on a chalkboard, but it was Jim's fault. So Jim, comments, and then we're moving on.
It's just, the left is gloating that Tucker Carlson lost his show on Fox, and because they've been trying to get him off Fox News for a long time, with saying absurd. And actually, the real dangerous thing is to say that, what Tucker Carlson's his reporting on, say, January 6th is an incitement to violence. The things that he says about the culture are incitements to violence. The left is always doing this. Your words are violence. Their violence is speech. That's the mantra they go by. But, when I saw, so the first clip was actually the day before Tucker Carlson got fired. And then the second clip that she did from her car for Instagram was the day he was fired. And you could, the smugness, that grin on her face. Guess what, AOC? He's not actually deplatformed. If Joe Rogan is worth a $100 million contract to Spotify, what do you think Tucker Carlson's going to get from someplace like Spotify or the Daily Wire or Glenn Beck? I know Glenn Beck, Justin, was joking on his show that very morning that it's like, and actually admitted that like they were already kind of working up a way to try to get Tucker over to the Blaze even before all this happened, because Glenn kind of saw trouble and thought maybe Tucker will be available sometime. So Tucker is not going to be deplatformed. He's going to make Rumble a real destination. Perhaps he's going to have his own podcast there. He'll have his own something, but it's going to make Joe Rogan's contract, look like a starter salary.
Yeah, no doubt. It'll be very interesting to see where he goes. He'll make a big splash wherever he goes. Yeah, I know that Glenn Beck has mentioned multiple times on his show about the idea of, oh, yeah, I got a phone call with him later today, I think, hopefully. And then just the other day, he had a big 4-piece Twitter thread about just kind of talking about how Tucker Carlson's great and now he and him could make a big splash or something like that on the Blaze. So we'll see. I guess we'll see. All right, we got to move on. We're already like a half hour into this podcast. Justin's feet are already starting to hurt, so we should get to our main topics. This was just supposed to be our opening chit chat. So our very own Justin Haskins, speak of the devil, had a piece published on Fox News titled "Biden Administration is Quietly Planning for a Future Where You Don't Own Money." So Justin tells me that this article did really well, got lots of attention. We've covered the idea of the digital dollar or central bank-backed digital currencies a number of times on this podcast. So our constant listeners should already be aware of the potential concerns about a scheme like this. But for those that are tuning in irregularly, or for those that need a refresher, Justin, care to give us an abridged rundown of the idea of a digital currency?
Right. So a central bank digital currency, there's a bunch of proposals all across the world for this right now. It's really one of these ideas that's sweeping the West, mainly because they've all destroyed their existing fiat paper-based currencies. And so they're trying to come up with ways to create a new currency. Well, the United States is one of those places that's looking at considering that. The Biden administration released an executive order back in March of last year, directing various departments in the government to study a central bank digital currency and issue reports about whether they should do it or not, what the cost benefits are of doing it, et cetera. The Federal Reserve has been studying this for a while. They've had all kinds of pilot projects going on. The Hamilton project is one of those things. They got stuff at MIT and elsewhere. So what is it exactly? A central bank digital currency is a new currency. It's not a digital version of the existing dollar. It's a new thing entirely. Unlike the existing currency, though, there's no physical corresponding physical part to it. So a lot of the things that people do on a day-to-day basis today, they're not using physical cash anymore, but there's always a corresponding physical dollar that is supposed to be related to that. So you can always go to the bank and go get cash, right? But a central bank digital currency wouldn't have that. It would only exist in digital form. And because it only exists in digital form, it has all kinds of really wonderful benefits from the perspective of authoritarian governments. Like, it's programmable, it's traceable. They'll know everywhere that everywhere you go, everywhere you spend money. They'll be able to create it with a push of a button. They'll be able to tie all kinds of rules to it that determine what people can use money for or not. They can easily airdrop money, essentially, into people's bank accounts. It has all kinds of really creepy implications for what society might look like. They already have this they've already started rolling stuff like this out in China and other parts of the world. And that's exactly how they're using it there. And in the various Biden administration reports, they talk about how a central bank digital currency needs to promote equity. It needs to promote financial inclusion. It needs to battle climate change and help improve the environment. Well, it's going to fight organized crime, like help the government fight organized crime. All those things require a programmable, traceable, easily manipulated digital currency. If it's not programmable and they can't trace it and they can't track it and they can't control it, then it doesn't have the ability to do any of the things they're promising it will do. So that's how the digital dollar is shaping up. There isn't a formal proposal for it yet, but all the pieces are coming together. There's going to be a formal proposal for it now. They're just trying to figure out the details of it.
So elaborate a little bit on the part of the title that's you won't own it, because that seems kind of like a foreign concept to the idea of money. Like, it's in my pocket. Like, what are you talking about? But
Right.
You very specifically mention that in the headline that you won't own it. So can you elaborate on that?
One of the craziest things about about the concept of a central bank digital currency, and this is something that we're just now starting to realize, is that it, based on all of the documents we've seen from the Biden administration and the Federal Reserve, it seems to be that the way that they're planning on designing it, you just wouldn't be able to own it. It wouldn't be possible for you to own a central bank digital dollar. And what I mean by that is this. I think the easiest way to explain this is to think about how the existing banking system works. Most people don't realize this, but when you go to the bank right now and you take cash or you deposit a check or whatever, and you give it to the bank now owns that money. You actually no longer own the money anymore. So when you give dollars to the bank, it's their dollars. It's not your dollars. Now, they're legally required to give you your dollars back when you ask for it, but on demand, but through regulations and stuff, unless they go out of business, in which case they don't necessarily have to do that. But it belongs to them. That's why they don't have to ask you permission to spend it on something, to go loan it out to somebody or something like that. They don't ask you permission before they do that because they own the money. See, so they know all of your transactions and all of this stuff because it's their money, actually. It's in their bank, so they own it. You just have rights to use it. But you always have the ability to go to the bank and take the money out of the bank, put it in your pocket, and walk out the door. And now the cash is yours. You own that cash. Okay. So you walking around, you own the cash. But with a central bank digital currency, there is no way for you to take it and stick it in your pocket and walk out the door. There is no cash equivalent. It always has to be in a bank account, or either with with the Federal Reserve directly, or with an intermediary, which is most likely an existing bank, public or private. Okay. That's what all of these reports from the Biden administration and the Federal Reserve are showing. They're showing that they're planning on designing it in such a way that you won't be able to put it onto a hard drive or something like that and stick it in your pocket and possess it physically and own it physically yourself. You'll always have to have it deposited in someone else's account, which means that all of the money, the digital money, will be owned by someone other than regular people. And because they own it, you don't, all of these various constitutional rights and things that normally come with ownership and possession and privacy and all this other stuff probably is going to get thrown out the window, because you can't claim, well, search and seizure or all these different constitutional rights and stuff if the money actually isn't your money. It's technically someone else's money. They actually own it, and you're just able to use it through this account. That's why this is really so dangerous, because when you don't own things, you lose a lot of rights associated with ownership. And if you don't own money, then that's a big problem, because you need money to do basically everything. So all of your privacy rights, all of these controls, you just don't have the ability to do it. So when people think of programmable currencies, and they're often thinking about the government spying on them or tracking them or tracing them, it's almost as though they have a camera watching you spend your money on things or something. That's what I think people associate these ideas with. The truth is, it's their money. You're just using their money. And that's the really scary part of it. If you don't own it, you don't really have rights. You don't really have true control of it. And that's what this article is focused on. And that's one of the things that we really want to highlight.
Right. Yeah. No. We've had these conversations about digital currency, and we're not sure, like Justin said, there's no formal proposal for the United States yet. So we're not sure exactly what it would look like. We're basically offering warnings of how it could look, even in worst case scenario type stuff, how it could look, and that the controls that could come along with it.
These are the things that they're putting in their report.
Sure, right.
So when they're talking about how they're going to design it, they're not saying, oh, yeah, we're going to let people download it onto a hard drive and walk around with it. That's not even really part of the option.
Right. And like you said, the rhetoric that's being used, or the things that are talked about in some of these reports that talk about consulting with stakeholders, promoting equity, fighting against climate change, like all of those basically necessitate some elements of control with the currency. It's hard to accomplish subjective goals with an objective and uncontrolled system of currency. So like those are the reasons why we're like, oh yeah, there's definitely going to be some of this stuff in it. The extent of which, I don't think that we know, but it's always best to kind of worry about worst case scenarios and then walk back from there. But thanks to some genuine journalism by pranksters on the internet, we got some insight into how digital currencies may be managed in at least the European Union. So some small online show was somehow able to connect with Christine Lagarde, president of the European Central Bank. The interview started with talking about I think they were posing as Zelensky, talking to her. This was like part of the prank or something. So they start talking to her about the role of monetary policy in the war with Ukraine and Russia. They ask about inflation and prices in Europe. It's hard to see what the prank is in this call, other than they had such an outsized access to such a high level person on the global stage for such like a small, internet show. So they use the opportunity to ask some real legitimate questions, and questions that these people, the Christine Lagardes of the world, don't ever have to answer, especially off the cuff where they don't have hours or days to prepare for. So what you have here is an unusually candid interview with the head of the European Union Central Bank. So around the 14-minute mark of this video, the prankster asked Lagarde about the creation of the digital euro. Now, in the European Union, much like the United States, the digital currency idea is still in the quote-unquote research phase of things. However, when she asked about it coming out, she seemed pretty definitive that it was coming out, but that it's going to be decided officially in October. And then also, and this is kind of a side note, Justin, she mentions how it's necessary, in her opinion, to create a digital currency to ensure that we don't get to a point where we're dependent on either an unfriendly nation's currency like China or Russia, or on, quote, a friendly currency, but which is activated by a private corporate entity like Facebook or like Google. So I thought that was very interesting. She brought that up twice during this interview. So I thought that was very interesting. She says, as I've said, I don't want Meta, Google, or Amazon to suddenly come up with a currency that will take over the sovereignty of Europe. She legitimately says that, which is pretty wild.
It's okay for them to control our elections, but not our finance system. Yeah,
that's where they draw the money at the central bank, Jim. No, that's for them. They control the money, not Amazon.
It's probably one of these secretly under the table agreed to things where it's like you have to be all in on the Great Reset and we'll protect you and ESG and all of that. Just don't touch the money. Leave that to us. But that's a whole side point. But the clip I want to actually show you, Justin, is where she talks about the pranksters, again, ask her about the control that would come with this type of digital currency. So, Andy, if we have that clip ready, go ahead and play it.
The digital euro is going to have a limited amount of control. There will be control. You're right. You're completely right. We are considering whether for very small amounts, anything that is around 300, 400 euros, we could have a mechanism where there is zero control. But that could be dangerous. The terrorist attacks on France back 10 years ago were entirely financed by those very small anonymous credit cards that you can recharge in total anonymity.
Yep. So there you go. There you go, Justin. At baseline, she is admitting to limited controls. We don't want it completely unlimited because of terrorism or something like that. So there can't be any anonymity. We have to make sure there's at least some controls, even in minor transactions that you would probably go into McDonald's. We have to make sure that's tracked. So Justin, thoughts on this, and then I want to get Jim and Chris's reaction to everything that we said so far.
Yeah. Look. There is a wealth of evidence that shows that this is going to happen. At least that's the plan, that all of the big major financial institutions, not just central banks, but all of them are aware of this, both in Europe and in America. And that the whole one of the biggest selling points, as hard as it might be for regular people to believe this, is that they'll get to watch what everyone's doing. That's a bonus. Not small amounts, maybe. Notice how she said maybe. We're not even sure about that. Maybe, not the small amounts. But the large amounts, because then we can stop terrorism, we can stop organized crime.
No, even the small amounts because of terrorism. That's what she said.
Well, she wasn't sure. She said we're thinking about it. That's what she said. Remember at the beginning? But I want to read before you move on to somebody else. I want to read because I was not, because I didn't know you were going to play this, but I was reading a speech by, who is this by? This is by the Undersecretary for Domestic Finance, because that's right. That's what I do in my spare time. Nellie Liang, maybe it's Liang. She gave a speech in March of this year called Next Steps to the Future of Money and Payments. And in it, and I don't think I've had an opportunity to tell you about this, Donna, yet. In it, it says right here, the third set of objectives, she's talking about the creation of a new currency, a CBDC. The third set of objectives relate to privacy, illicit finance, and financial inclusion. And then it says that a CBDC would need to have the ability to protect users and minimize the risk of illicit financial transactions. In addition, given that the United States has the largest unbanked population, blah, 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 this would help us with equity and financial inclusion and all of that stuff. So then she says this: across the three interests, global financial leadership, national security, and privacy, illicit finance, and inclusion, which is one thing, I guess, CBDC design choices are likely to involve trade-offs. We're going to have to trade off with privacy and these other things. As an example, one way of reconciling privacy with illicit finance concerns in a retail CBDC might be to have a tiered structure in which less data are collected for small dollar transactions or small volume accounts. But limits on the amount or number of transactions could make a retail CBDC less useful to end users. This suggests a three-way trade-off among privacy, countering illicit finance goals and inclusion. And the CBDC working group, which is a U.S. government working group related to all of this, will have to identify trade-offs and possible ways of reconciling these objectives, including looking ahead to possible technological advancements that could reduce the size of any of these trade-offs. So she's flat out saying almost the same thing. We have to balance all these things. And maybe, you know, we could have this sort of, we'll collect less data. She didn't say no data. She said we'll collect less data for small dollar amounts or small dollar accounts. But with everybody else, we're going to have to keep a really close eye on what's going on there.
Yeah, so I'm going to get Chris and Jim's perspectives on this, but I do have one more article that relates to all of this. And before I even get to that, I will say that you just mentioned that it seems like they're reading from the same, they're saying the same stuff. The next article that I have also seems like they're reading from the same playbook. And as we know from us and doing all that work on the Great Reset, when all of these very important people and influential people are all reading from the same playbook, you know something's up. But before I get to that, I want to go to Chris first. I feel like I haven't heard your beautiful voice in a while. Chris, what are your thoughts on all of this stuff that we're talking about with this upcoming digital dollar?
I don't know. I kind of go back and forth on this. I mean, I sometimes wonder if it's less likely than we're making it out to be that it's going to actually come into fruition. I think that the American people, by and large, would just never allow this to happen. So I wonder if this is this, you know, these
You mean like being locked in their homes and forced to wear masks everywhere they go, Chris?
Changing.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It's just
no. I mean, I just. I'm not saying that I don't think it's impossible that it could happen, but I do think that the spirit of American individualism and freedom, I can't see 330 million people just saying, "Oh shucks, I'm just going to give up all my autonomy to this central bank digital currency." I think that it would precipitate a
I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah, no. Could
let Jim talk.
Wait. I will go to Jim, but Chris, I'm glad that you have that hesitation or whatever, because I'm going to address that a little bit later. But go ahead, Jim.
You know, Chris, when I have to take you out for lunch today, I think I'm going to have to make you order from the children's menu because you're as naive as a child. With that take,
that's harsh.
That's harsh.
That's really harsh.
Chris could take it.
Yeah,
he's a big boy. Well, he's not. He's a big boy, but he's still going to order from the kids menu. Look, I'm
going to go to town. I'm going to order the most expensive thing.
Get the filet mignon.
Yeah, they're going to Morton's Steakhouse.
Yeah, make him take you to Morton's.
Well, I mean, look. So we're going to be accused of peddling conspiracy theories here, as often happens, and as I've said on this podcast many times, you can't call them conspiracy theories anymore because they end up being spoiler alerts. I'm trying to think, Justin, of some crazy liberty crushing idea from our ideological leftist global elites, either they're inside government or outside government, that hasn't eventually come true or almost come true, or it'll come true, we'll make it happen later. I mean, just going back to COVID, I mean, the idea, Chris, that, the American people, 330 million of us won't put up with this. We're not going to be able to choose to do these sorts of things. These sorts of things will be imposed upon us by the people who are in the actual control of our monetary system globally, of our government here in the United States and in the European Union. The idea that we can opt in or out of these crazy leftist ideas that always crush our liberty and that always end up being expensive and don't work and lead to misery and death often. The idea that we can opt out of that stuff and live our lives the way we want, it is becoming decreasingly, we're becoming decreasingly able to opt out of those sorts of things. And this would be, I would think, the last hurdle they would have to leap in order to completely control the population. If you can't spend $300 without the government knowing what you spent it on, and obviously with the intent to tell you whether you did it right or wrong, and to keep score, why do you think they're tracking of it? It's to keep score. And what kind of score? A social credit score. And so you will have to live your life always thinking about, how do I stay in the good graces of the people who actually run the society? I am not allowed to make choices that I may feel are good for me or for my family. I have to be thinking about living my life in a way that doesn't irritate the people that can actually crush my life by, I don't know, deleting all of my money or saying you're not allowed to spend that on this thing or that thing anymore because we don't want you to. And so the idea that we can opt out of this sort of thing, where have we been able to do that in the past?
Yeah,
just even in the recent past, we have been able to do that.
While Jim was talking, I was thinking about Chris's comments, and they seem very, very familiar, Chris. And they seem familiar to a point when you were reading The Great Reset for the first time and thinking, "Oh, this seems a little too conspiracy. I don't know if this is actually going to happen." And then where do you find yourself now when it comes to ESG and everything? Exactly.
Well, hold on, wait. I want to.
Can I?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, okay, ha ha ha. Yeah, I'm a big idiot for having an alternative point of view. Whatever. I'm sorry, I'm not a hive mind. I have my own mind.
All right, so he admitted it. All right, let's move on.
Let me say one thing. But no, seriously.
No, go ahead. I'm just joking.
Yeah, of course. Just think about this. Think about the amount of data that would be necessary for them to comb through in order to micromanage all of our transactions. And I think this is very similar to what they did with the Patriot Act when the NSA said, we're going to vacuum up all the emails and phone calls and text messages that Americans do so that we can filter out, terroristic signals. How did that work for them? That's been a complete and utter failure. So how in the world could they say, well, we're going to create this new system in which I don't understand. You guys are throwing me off my train of thought with all these weird gestures.
Right here. We got a perfect comment. Perfect timing. AI
but what I'm saying is, actually, Christine, that is a very good
that's exactly what I was going to say.
Or you could create some crazy algorithm that could do it. I mean, yeah, I guess that's possible, but I still, in my heart of hearts, have this feeling that the American people, my brothers and sisters, especially in the Heartland, in flyover country where I live,
amen.
We will take our pitchstopwatch and we will go to the central bank and we will take Jerome Powell.
Whoa! AOC would say this is an incitement of violence. Let's stop.
Chris, now you're not just getting from the kids menu, but I'm going to pick it out too because you're you're just going to get chicken tenders and fries and a small soda.
Well, look, actually, but to Chris's point, actually, I mean, I do think that what Chris is saying is he's saying he doesn't deny that this is going to be attempted. Am I right, Chris? This is going to be attempted. You're saying you think that the public will push back enough that it isn't going to ultimately happen.
Yes,
Am I getting that right? Okay.
Yeah.
So actually, I mean, I hope that he's right. I mean, otherwise we're all totally screwed. If Chris is
I'm going to address this. I'm going to address this, Justin. So let me just quickly go through this last.
I don't think that I don't think that the vast majority of Americans will just roll over and say, "Oh shucks, there goes my bank account." Like, I hope the federal government's nice to me and is my best buddy and allows me to do what I want to do. I do think that would, I
hope you're right.
Such a fire among the American people. Because when you just think of it this way. So in the 2020 election, we're basically a split country, 50-50, maybe 48-52, conservative versus liberal. Are you telling me that 48% of the people who voted or 50% whomever for, Donald Trump are just going to say, okay, fine, you guys win. Right. I think that they will go down with a fight. And I would go down with the fight.
I mean, okay.
And I hope all three of you would too.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually kind of getting beside the point because the point of what we're doing right now isn't necessarily predicting anything. It's warning people. So the only way that they will put up a fight is if they are properly warned. So let's just put this on the side.
Right. So that was my point. I think actually what Chris is saying is not. I think he's right. I mean, I think we should just shut down the Heartland Institute, go home if we know that Chris is wrong. Because what's the point?
Right.
So I mean, I get that.
Your
I think
actions
that was
on an everyday basis are proving my point.
Let's not get carried away. All
right. I want to address this one thing. Justin, we're going long. I'm sorry. But there's a New York Times article by Paul Krugman, who is one of just the worst economist that's ever graced the pages of a newspaper. But they keep giving him opinion pages, whatever. So he wrote a piece, and he is the type of guy that just carries water for the establishment. That is Paul Krugman's bio, basically, on his Twitter account. I carry water for the establishment. Anyways, he wrote an article trying to basically take a shot at Ron DeSantis saying critical things about a potential CBDC. So in the article, he says that the people that are against, and I'm summarizing this, I'm not reading word for word here. People against CBDCs in the U.S. are those that don't want it to be harder to commit tax fraud and launder money. Now, I'm paraphrasing, but that is essentially what he says. That the people that are whispering in Ron DeSantis' ear and filling him with all this information are people that don't want it to be harder to commit tax fraud or launder money. He literally says something almost exactly like that. He admits that it's conceivable that the Federal Reserve might issue such a currency in the future. And then he goes on to gaslight us that a digital currency is just like having a bank account with a debit card. And there's essentially no difference than for today, for the average American, if we have a system like this. He then suggests that most of the physical money out there, the actual physical money out there is only out there for people to commit tax evasion, illegal purchases of drugs and weapons, extortion, and so on. He literally says this in his article. So, like, if you want to know what the rhetoric is of the people pushing this agenda, read Paul Krugman.
Yeah.
He describes how great and simple it would be for people to just open up an account with the Federal Reserve. So this is one of the ways that Justin was talking about, how you would just have like the direct issuer of currency be your bank. But he says in order to stave off potentially fierce pushback from the banking industry, these accounts will instead be handled by private sector intermediaries. All of the banks that support ESG. So it kind of explains why all those banks are on board, I feel like, doesn't it?
Those banks also make up the Fed, by the way. So,
the remainder of the article makes a case against cryptocurrency in general and how it would only be used by criminals after a central bank digital currency comes out. So the rhetoric is all there, and it's all very in line with Christine Lagarde. She's had quotes in the past that we've talked about how her disdain for cryptocurrencies and how it's not real currency and all of that stuff. So he's just parroting that same type of stuff. But to me, this article just kind of shows what the rhetoric is to initiate a program like this. That it's to try to push back against people that want to use actual physical money for bad reasons. And there's no other reason why you would want your standard money system the way it is, and that it's all just there's no difference here. It's just the same thing. So that's kind of what I think the strategy is going to be, Chris. This isn't going to be like, hey, everyone brace for impact. We're going to have a whole new currency. They're going to try to pretend that this is no different, that, you're just going to have a debit card instead of actually having cash on hand. But otherwise, everything's the same.
I agree. And I remember when we were talking about the SVB collapse, like a couple months ago, that I kind of, made this point too, where I was saying, hey, it's interesting that the big banks are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And those smaller regional banks are being, like obliterated. And I think that one of their goals is to have, the federal government with like 5 big banks working hand in hand, because it's a lot easier for them to work together to implement this. However, I still have faith in my, fellow countrymen that there will be a massive backlash to it. I don't know if it's going to.
So here's another option.
But
here's another option. And this is going to tie into our secondary topic that we're going to probably go through at a pretty rapid pace here. But so what could necessitate a creation of a new currency in the United States? So unless the strategy is to convince people that this isn't a new currency and that it's just virtually the same as, the way that you've been operating with the dollar your entire life, and I agree with you, Chris. I don't think the majority of people will just voluntarily accept such a big change. But my first thought was, and I mentioned this to Justin a few days ago, was the idea of not letting a good crisis go to waste. And, as people that are watching the show know, surely we're no short on potential crises. Well, there's a debt crisis, and looming recession, potential bond market bubble. But the thing that's gotten a little bit more attention, more so recently than usual, is the idea of the U.S. dollar losing its status as the world reserve currency. So I'm sure that most listeners are familiar with this concept. It's the idea that the majority of the countries around the world use the US dollar when conducting international trade. It's easier to trade in a uniform currency so that there's no situations where Portugal is offered Japanese yen and they don't want that currency because it's harder to trade with some other. So everyone just uses the US dollar. So the US dollar has been the reserve currency since the end of World War II. The status was really cemented in place in the early 70s when OPEC agreed to price all of their oil exports exclusively in the US dollar. This is where the term petrodollar comes from, actually. But the world reserve currency, so it comes with some benefits, right? So there's increased demand for the dollar. Countries need it to transact, so it stabilizes the price of the dollar. Lower borrowing costs for American or people using the US dollar, greater influence on the global stage. And arguably, this status allows the United States to export inflation. So people talk about how inflation is a hidden tax. Well, if the tax is on everyone that's holding a US dollar, then that even works on foreign countries.
It allows us to export debt.
Sure.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
So there have been a few stories recently that have suggested that the dollar's dominance as the world reserve currency might be slipping a little bit. So China announced recently a deal with Brazil to use their own currencies while conducting bilateral trade. China is also in talks with Saudi Arabia and other oil countries to use its currency as opposed to the dollar. The US dollar made up 70% of world reserves in the year 2000. That's been trending downward ever since. Currently, according to this one article that I was reading, at 58%. But according to a Markets Insider piece, last year, the pace of erosion of the dollar was 10 times faster than previous years. That article suggests that the global share is below 50%. So I would assume that, if the dollar were to lose its world reserve status, that there might be some repercussions. Justin and I have been warning about this when we would talk about modern monetary theory. The idea that if you keep printing money, there's a possibility that foreign countries might get sick of paying your inflation tax and instead use a different currency, maybe their own, maybe a basket of currencies like that SDR system. And you know what happens then? Those dollars held by countries can only be used in one place, the United States. So you'd see a flood of dollars rushing back into the United States that are ushering in inflation levels that would make what we're experiencing today look like a joke. In fact, it might be so bad, it could necessitate a creation of a new currency, perhaps a digital one with a host of, where the host country has a whole bunch of different controls and levers over said currency. So, Chris, I'll give you first word on this. Anything that I said.
No, I agree with everything you just said. And I also think that the United States' foreign policy in relation to the beginning of the, Russian invasion in Ukraine, in which we just basically put sanctions on Russian oligarchs and literally just took money from the Russian central bank, dollars, and, took them and brought them back into the United States. I think that was a shot across the bow to the rest of the world, where it's like, whoa, if you get on the bad side of the United States, they are capable, because they are the world reserve currency, of just doing whatever they want. So I think that this is also a defensive posture for, the so-called BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Yeah. Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, hey, wait a second, we don't want to be in the position where if the United States says, hey, we don't like what you're doing here, or we don't like what you're doing there, well, we are going to use King Dollar to just, strong arm your economy into doing what we want you to do. So I think some of this is our own policies that are coming back to bite us. But I also absolutely agree with you that a lot of these countries are sick and tired of buying U.S. Treasury bonds and paying our inflation tax for us. And like I said earlier, in the past few decades, especially with the rise of China and China coming into the World Trade Organization and all this stuff, what we've done is we have exported debt, and we've exported debt, dollars, and we've imported products and services. That is not a sustainable trajectory for an economy to be on. And I think that this is maybe a wake-up call. I hope it's a wake-up call for the next administration to try to get our fiscal house back in order. And I'm a little bit optimistic because Kevin McCarthy apparently reached a deal with at least the House Republicans that they're going to curb spending and put some other controls. I know you guys are laughing at me again.
Wait, Jim. So he's got the kids menu.
Here's my new take on everything. Everything sucks. The United States is going to hell, and there's no point in even trying to solve.
No, I'm just.
Attaboy.
Yeah, it might be a sad outlook, but you're a little bit more accurate. Jim, it seems like there could be two potentials of a lead up to a digital currency or proposal for a true digital currency. Like I said, a gradual thing where it's like, oh, this is no different. Don't look behind the curtain or anything like that. Or we're in crisis mode. We have to do something. You're just going to have to deal with it. So thoughts on that, kind of those two options, or just anything that I mentioned about the idea of the dollar losing its status?
Well, I was just going to ask both you and Justin, if you were trying to accelerate our transition to a global digital currency, what are some of the things that you would think would be important to do, like over the last couple of years or so? I don't know, maybe just printing up so many dollars that its value globally is value domestically it diminishes. And now we see that other countries are deciding to abandon the dollar. So if you wanted to move toward a global digital currency, these are some of the things that you would do to make sure we get there even faster. I mean, I think, I always thought, with the development of the EU, I mean, human beings don't live for hundreds of years. But, I always figured, maybe one day the Earth would be kind of like the Star Trek universe in the future, where it's just the planet and that there's a global currency and that countries don't really matter. All that really matters is commerce and, that you're all human beings. And so I think eventually, probably it would seem logical that maybe around the world there would be a global digital currency, but we shouldn't be there like soon. And what it takes to get there is not getting there through moves of strength, but getting there through moves of destruction and weakness. And so you destroy the American economy so that it is no longer the colossus that can actually, dictate through commerce the best way to organize societies. Instead, you destroy currencies so that everything can be centralized with a centralized global power, and controlling the money is the most important thing to controlling people.
Chris, I will end on a little bit of a bright note. Okay, so just it's not all doom and gloom from me.
Do I get to order the big boy menu? Is that right now?
But Justin, I'll give you kind of final words before I wrap up the show.
So I think that the end of the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency is inevitable. Like that is already happening. The transition away from the dollar is already occurring. You're seeing what you are seeing is you're seeing an alliance between China and Russia and other nations forming. They're going to have some kind of currency, or maybe a couple of currencies that they primarily use, and then the West will have one or maybe more currencies that they're going to use. And that's how it's going to look. The world is actually dividing again along East and West lanes, right? And what the leaders in the West want is a great reset, sort of no borders within the West world. Okay, they want all the West to be the same, and they want to drag the East kicking and screaming along with it. And the East, Russia, China, parts of the Middle East, etc., are saying, no way. We don't want anything to do with that. We're going to have our own way of doing things. And what the leaders in the West always do is they use the sort of advantages, so to speak, of the efficiencies of tyranny and authoritarianism in the East as a justification for why we need something not quite as authoritarian or tyrannical in the West, but we need something like it. And that's exactly what's going to happen here with this. You're seeing the central bank digital currency idea is already caught on in the East. It's been around for a while. They're starting to develop it more and more and more. And as China and Russia and others become increasingly more powerful, not not because of their currency, but because of other things, like they're willing to use the most affordable form of energy, for example. And they're more responsible when it comes to spending, and they buy more hard assets and real mines and gold and silver and lithium and all these things that you need to make things. They actually make things over there. Like, that's the reason why they're becoming more powerful and wealthier. But what the West is going to say is actually the real reason is because they can control the economy much easier, because they've got all these little dials that they can turn, and they can tweak things just right. And we're not saying we want to be just like them, but we want to do something like that. So we have to compete with them. Right. And that's exactly what this is. It's going to be sold as our dollar is dying because it's this archaic, old, terrible, paper thing. It's stupid and awful. And what we need is all the advantages that they have. And if we could just have something like that, we'll be able to catch up with them. When in reality, it has nothing to do with any of that. It's about something completely different. But that's how it's going to be sold. And a crisis is always the moment when they're going to do this. They're waiting for that moment where people are desperate enough that they will do anything, which is exactly and what we learned with COVID. The big lesson for the elites in COVID was, if they can make the crisis big enough and believable and big enough, people will literally do anything. A segment of society will literally do anything you want. They will rat out their neighbors as if we're living in 1930s Germany. Like, they will do anything to as long as the crisis is big enough and believable. And so I think that is the direction that all of this is headed. And so the question is going to be, are we going to go in that direction? Are we going to allow our leaders to move us in that direction? Or are we going to push back against that? And unfortunately, it's going to require a change in who's running things in Washington for this train to be derailed. Otherwise, this is going to happen, because that is unquestionably, undeniably the plan that the Biden administration and others are putting into place here in the U.S. That's the goal. The goal is control. And unless we stop it, that's what's going to happen. There is no denying that. They're not going to change their minds.
Yeah. So just one final thing that I'll leave off, like I promised, a little bit of a maybe not necessarily a bright spot, but a room for some optimism. Okay. So I'm no economist.
My language.
But I'd be willing to bet that this sort of change would not happen that quickly. I'd be willing to bet that it's a relatively slow changing of the guard as opposed to a rapid one. And there's good reason to doubt that the Chinese yuan would be the out-and-out replacement of the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency. For starters, the Chinese government leverages a lot of control over their yuan. They even restrict it in many cases from even being able to leave the country. So consumers, whether it be, people or investors or other countries that want to hold reserve currency, they probably don't have a natural appetite for a currency that could be controlled and restricted by a communist government so much. So I don't see like a rapid changing of, the U.S. dollar dropping and China's yuan going up like a 45-degree angle or something like that. It would probably be a much slower process, and it would be more likely, listening to Justin talking, that a development of like a parallel economy where you've got the East and the West kind of make a line down the center, and we've got the West on one side and the East on the other side. And then the last thing, and this is kind of highlighted by those comments that I played of Christine Lagarde, that Europe is kind of the canary in the coal mine when it comes to this. They seem to be a little bit more advanced in all of their stuff when it comes to the ESG or a digital currency. So they might jump off that cliff before we do. And we're going to be there to see what that splatter looks like when they fall off that cliff and report back to you as intellectual ammunition for you to be better equipped to push back against a scheme like this here in America. But gentlemen, that's what I wanted to end with. If anyone's got anything they want to get off their chest, any final words, now's your opportunity.
I'm looking forward to this kid meal.
That's right. You'll have to report back on it next week. But I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join us every week for a new episode. For those audio-only listeners that are catching this show on a Friday or later, you can join us a day earlier on Thursdays at noon Central Time, where we are broadcasting live on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Rumble, where you can join us. Throw your comments and questions in the stream. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. Also, if you're listening to us, leave a review for us on iTunes. That'd be greatly appreciated. You can also help out the show by doing a couple of things that won't cost you a penny, only it'll cost you a couple of seconds, which is hitting that like button, subscribing if you haven't already, sharing this content, or just leaving a comment under the video. All helps break through the big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. If you'd like, you could follow us on Twitter at InTheTankPod, or you can send us your comments and suggestions for the show by emailing us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At J Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
Fantastic. Justin, same question.
They can find me at Justin T. Haskins on Twitter, Facebook, not Parler, because apparently that's gone now, but Getter and stoppingsocialism.com and heartland.org.
Fantastic. And Chris Talgo, what do you have to pitch today?
StoppingSocialism.com, heartland.org. We have a great new ESG paper. Please go to heartland.org and just check it out. Even if it's just a summary, really well done. It explains ESG in a very, all-encompassing manner.
Yeah, hopefully there's a development with ESG in Florida by this time next week. And if so, we will probably dedicate the majority of the episode to the topic of ESG, and surely we'll talk about that paper that Chris is mentioning. But thank you all for tuning into this episode. We will talk to you next week.